He set the coat on the counter like he was setting down the last thing he owned. And he kept his hands flat on top of it, pressing down the way a person does when they're hoping the trembling won't be noticed. Regan Pye noticed. She noticed the tremor in his fingers and the way the coat's wool was worn through at both elbows, and the fact that his shoes, laced with care, were cracked across the left toe in a line that suggested he'd walked farther than a man his age ought to. She noticed these things because she noticed everything about the people who came into Pye's pressing. 3 years running a mending shop in a town of 4,000 had made her fluent in the things a person couldn't say out loud. "I should tell you," he said, "that I'm not carrying much." His voice was steady even if his hands weren't. That told her something too. "Tell me about the coat," Regan said. He looked at her the way people look when they've prepared a sentence, and the response they get isn't the one they prepared for. Then something in his shoulders let go, just slightly. "Left elbow's gone through, right's not far behind. There's a button missing on the cuff, the second one. I have the button." He reached into his breast pocket with 2 careful fingers and set a dark horn button on the counter beside the coat. "I kept it." "That's the hardest part to find," Regan said. "Most people lose it and end up with a coat that doesn't match itself." She turned the cuff over in her hands. The stitching around the button loop was tight and old, and had been repaired before neatly by someone who knew what they were doing. Not him, his hands couldn't manage work that fine anymore. Someone else, someone who was no longer around to do it. She did not ask. She folded the coat over her forearm. "I can have it ready Thursday," she said. $40 for the elbows and the button. $20 if you're short." He opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved across his face that she understood without wanting to, the arithmetic of pride. "20's fair," she said before he could work out how to refuse it. "The wool's quality makes the job easier." He paid her $12, which was what he had, and she wrote the ticket and said nothing about the difference. His name, when he gave it, was Desmond Rowe. He thanked her twice in a voice that had gone quieter the second time, and he left. That was a Tuesday in October, in the town of Winhaven, Ontario, where the maples had already gone, and the lake sat flat and pewter grey under a sky that couldn't make up its mind. Regan stood at the window after he'd gone and watched him walk east along Mill Street, his old tweed jacket not nearly warm enough for the temperature. She thought that she had seen a great many proud people in this shop, but not many who wore it quite so quietly. She had $37 in the operating account. The mortgage on the building, her great-aunt Ida's building, which had been her great-aunt Lottie's building before that, and which had come to Regan 3 years ago, with a box of unpaid invoices and a sewing machine that sounded like it had opinions, was 4 weeks behind. A letter from the bank sat under the register, precise and polite and completely unmerciful. Regan put Desmond Rowe's coat on the good hanger and went back to work. He came back Thursday to collect it. She'd done both elbows and the button and pressed the whole thing, which she hadn't charged him for. He put it on right there at the counter and fastened the buttons, slowly, each one, with the concentration of a man who had learned to be patient with his own hands. And when he got to the mended cuff, the second button, he stopped, just stopped. "You pressed the lining," he said. It was wrinkled. No one's pressed the lining in 10 years. Then it was overdue. She handed him his change and he looked at the coins in his palm for a moment, and she braced for an argument, and instead he said, "Do you have a shirt that needs a button, 2 buttons, any number of buttons?" She stared. "I can't sew anymore as such," he said, matter-of-factly, "but I can sit here and tell you whether the color is right while you do it. That's the only skill I have left that costs nothing." She laughed. She hadn't expected to. "Thursday afternoons are quiet," she said. "Sit down if you like." He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He brought his good flannel shirt for pressing, and a pair of trousers that needed a hem, and he sat on the wooden stool beside the pressing table and watched her work with an attention that wasn't intrusive. It was the attention of someone who understood what it meant to make something well. His hands, she noticed over those hours, were remarkable even in their damage. The knuckles were enlarged, the fingers crooked at their ends, but the bones beneath the skin were long and articulate, and when he forgot to keep them still, when he was talking about something, they moved in patterns she couldn't quite name. A conductor, maybe. Or a man tuning an instrument. She asked him, the third Thursday, what he'd done before. He looked at his hands. "I made things," he said, "out of wood." "What kind of things?" "Stringed instruments mostly, violins. Cellos, a few. A pause, 1 or 2 that were harder to name than that." She waited. When he didn't continue, she filed it away. He'd been coming 4 Thursdays when Prescott Halm walked in. Halm was in his mid-40s, the kind of man who wore his money and how little he explained himself. He set a business card on the counter like someone who'd done it so many times the gesture had become unconscious. Miss Pye, Halm Property and Development. I'll be brief. His eyes moved over the shop and settled on nothing, the way eyes do when they've already decided what they're seeing. We've made inquiries about this property before. You didn't respond. I responded, Regan said. I put the letter in the recycling. The offer's changed. This is a heritage corner lot. What we're prepared to offer now is... He named a number that had an effect on Regan she didn't want him to see. Of course, the bank's been patient, but patience has a timeline. They've been quite forthcoming about that timeline. The shop was quiet. The pressing machine exhaled its slow white steam. You're threatening me, Regan said very politely. Holmes spread his hands. I'm offering you a way out, there's a difference. She'd heard that construction before, from someone who'd meant kindness by it. Coming from Holmes' mouth, it had no warmth at all. Out, she said. Take your card. He went. At the door, he paused and the pleasantness fell away like a coat he'd only borrowed. The town's changing, Miss Pye. You can sell me the corner on good terms, or you can wait until the terms aren't yours to negotiate. The bell above the door rang behind him, and the shop went quiet. Desmond Rowe had not said a word through any of it. When Regan turned back to the pressing table, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't pass, something that combined recognition with something older, something grieved. How long, he asked. 4 weeks before the bank moves, give or take. He nodded slowly. He picked up his hat from the stool and turned it in his ruined hands. Keep the shop open, Regan, he said. It was the first time he'd used her given name. A little while longer. Can you do that? I can do a lot of things a little while longer, she said. It's the long while I haven't figured out. He almost smiled. It started at the corner of his mouth and didn't quite finish. Yes, he said, that's always the part. He left without his hat, which she found under the stool when she went to sweep. She put it on the shelf above the register, and on the counter where his hands had rested, he'd left something she hadn't seen him place. A small carved piece of wood, no bigger than a matchbook, smooth as river stone, shaped like a treble clef. The wood was pale and close-grained, and it had been carved by someone who had once been very good with their hands. She put it in her apron pocket. He didn't come the following Thursday, nor the one after. On the 3rd week of no Desmond Rowe, a woman came into Pye's pressing who did not look like anyone's customer. She was slight, Chinese-Canadian, early 40s, in a charcoal coat cut to say she owned her time rather than spent it. She set a slim folder on the counter and said, Mrs. Pye, my name is Mirabelle Chow. I'm a solicitor. I represent the estate of Mr. Desmond Rowe. Regan's hand went to the counter. Represent, she said. He is very much alive and currently in Halifax being difficult about a follow-up appointment, Miss Chow said, and something in the corner of her mouth might have been amusement. He is not an easy client. He acts and leaves the paperwork to others. The folder, when it opened, was substantial. A title transfer, registered, witnessed and dated 5 days earlier. The Rowe lakefront property on Birch Narrows Road. The stone house, the workshop building, the boathouse and 7.5 acres of protected shoreline had been transferred legally and without conditions to Regan Pye. Last assessed, Miss Chow said, at 1.6 million conservatively. The market has moved. Regan said nothing for what was probably a full minute. The pressing machine breathed. Outside, the first real snow of the season was beginning to settle on the awning. That's not, Regan started. It is. Miss Chow was not unkind. He was quite specific that I tell you the number before giving you his letter, so that when you read it you would already know you weren't imagining things. The letter was on cream paper in a handwriting she recognized, the same cramped, deliberate marks as the label carved into the wooden treble clef. Regan, you mended a coat for a man who told you he couldn't pay you properly. You did it again the next time. You let him sit in your shop 4 Thursday afternoons and never once treated him like something that needed managing. I have known a great many people with more than you have. I have known almost none who did what you did the way you did it. The property is yours because it was always too good for what I was using it for, which was hiding. Don't let harm anywhere near the workshop. Dr. She read it twice. She stood very still while the snow came down outside, and the pressing machine kept its slow white breath. He arrived while the letter was still in her hand. Corbin Rowe was 38, tall in the same way Desmond was tall, and he wore his winter coat like a man who'd been moving quickly and hadn't slowed down yet. He had his grandfather's colouring, grey-blue eyes, dark brows. But where Desmond's face held a certain long patience, this one held the tight focus of someone who had been holding things together for a long time and had very nearly run out of grip. "You'll be the tailor," he said. "I'll be the owner," Regan said. She set the letter down. "Can I take your coat?" He was too distracted and too certain of his errand to notice she'd offered anything. "Corbin Rowe, I think you know why I'm here." He had a folder of his own, thicker than Mirabelle Chow's. "My grandfather is elderly and unwell, and he made a decision that a court will find very straightforward to examine. A woman he'd known less than a month, in financial distress, receiving an estate worth." "I know what it's worth," Regan said. "Miss Chow told me the number." He stopped, something recalculated behind his eyes. "He told you the number first," Corbin said, quieter. "Of course he did." He dragged a hand through his hair. "What I'm prepared to offer." "Tell me about the workshop first," Regan said. He blinked. "He said he was hiding there," Regan said. "I want to know what he was hiding from." The question landed somewhere unguarded. She watched his jaw work. "The workshop's been locked since before I was born," he said. "He told me it was where he kept his failed pieces, the things he didn't want anyone to see." "And you believed him?" "He's my grandfather. He's not," a pause. "He's not a man who explains himself, never has been." "He explains himself in writing," Regan said. She folded the letter. "He explained himself to me." The silence between them was not comfortable. Outside, the snow had begun in earnest. He named a number that would have cleared Ida's mortgage and the invoice box, and bought her a sewing machine that didn't sound like it resented her. She said no. She drove to the Birch Narrows property that evening, alone, the treble clef in her coat pocket. Corbin had told her not to go without him. That had settled it. The property appeared through bare trees as her headlights swept the drive. A low stone house gone silver with age, and behind it, set closer to the water, a long wooden building with a shallow roof and a wall of north-facing windows dark in the November evening. The lake lay beyond them both, black and absolutely still, with a thread of light on the far shore that looked like it had always been there. She sat with the engine running for a moment, then she got out. The workshop door was unlocked. That was the first thing that told her someone had expected her. It opened onto a smell she had never encountered and recognized somehow anyway. Raw wood and rosin and the beeswax rubbed into old tools, and something under all of it that was drier and sweeter. The smell of shavings held for decades in a room where the temperature never changed much. She stood in the doorway while her eyes adjusted. A lamp was burning on a workbench at the far end. Standing beside it, with the settled calm of a person who had been waiting a long time and made peace with the waiting, was an old woman. Small and broad-shouldered, in a green cardigan and rubber-soled shoes, white hair cut close. She had the look of someone who had stayed in one place long enough that the place had grown around her. "You came the back way," the old woman said. "He thought you might." Regan's heart was going hard. "Who are you?" "Eula Whitby. I've kept this property 31 years. She said it plainly. The way you state a fact that has never needed justification. He telephoned from Halifax. Said a woman named Regan Pye would come. Probably alone. Probably at night, because she'd been told not to. The old woman's dark eyes held a dry amusement. "He knows people, I'll give him that. Come in. There's something you need to see before the grandson arrives." Regan came in. Eula turned the lamp on its arm so the light swept the long wall to the left, and Regan stopped walking. The wall was instruments. Not finished instruments, not polished, strung, complete things. These were in various stages of becoming. Bodies without necks, necks without fingerboards, ribs bent and clamped to drying forms. And among them, hanging from small brass hooks or propped in purpose-built slots, were the finished ones, a dozen, 2 dozen, each with a small handwritten card beneath it. Each card bore a name. She moved closer. Abigail, 1987. Remy, 1991. Solange, 1995, ordinary at first glance. Then she saw, near the center of the wall, a violin unlike the others. Smaller, with a reddish-brown varnish worn to an almost nothing at the edges from handling, and a card that read, in handwriting she now knew, Lottie. No date, no surname, Lottie. "My great-aunt," Regan said. Her voice came out strange. Her name was Lottie Pye. She ran the pressing shop before Ida. She never married. She used to say Winhaven had enough husbands to spare and none worth keeping. The old joke, the one Regan had heard a dozen times at the pressing table, felt different now. Felt like a thing worn smooth from repetition, a grief passed down as a punchline, because that was the only way to carry it forward. She left the shop to Ida. Ida left it to me. "Sit down," Eula said. Her voice had changed. "There's a chair behind you." Desmond Rowe had been 26 when he first came to Wynhaven, already making a name for himself in instrument-making circles, small enough that a name could mean something. He'd come to source tonewoods from a mill on the North Shore and stopped for coffee at a shop on Mill Street, then called Pye's Fine Mending, and the woman behind the counter had been Lottie Pye. They had a year. Eula said the word year with a particular weight, the way you say it when you mean it held an entire life inside it. A year of Desmond driving up from Toronto on weekends, of Lottie's sharp opinions on every instrument he showed her, and his helpless delight in her being right about them, of an engagement understood between them but never quite formalized, because to formalize it was to have to defend it to his family, and his family, old money, old rules, had opinions about the kind of woman a Rowe married. When Desmond's mother found out, she had not shouted. The Rowe family did not shout. She had instead made a phone call to the bank, where Lottie's father carried a small business loan. And the loan had been called in on 30 days' notice, and Lottie's father's hardware business had folded by spring, and the family had scattered. Desmond had been presented with the situation as though it were weather, already arrived, nothing to be done. He had been allowed to keep the workshop. He had been expected to understand what was expected of him. He married the woman his mother chose. He made instruments for 50 years. He kept the workshop locked, and he kept, inside it on the wall, the one he had made for Lottie, the one he had never been allowed to give her. She came back, Regan said. It was not quite a question. 15 years later, when her father died and there was no reason left to stay away, she opened the pressing shop with what she'd saved, and she ran it until she couldn't anymore, and she left it to Ida without explaining why she'd stayed in Wynhaven all those years and never said a word to him. The old woman looked at the violin on the wall. Two proud people. Two people who wouldn't show the wanting. That's the whole story. 50 years in a sentence. Regan looked at Lottie on the wall, at the worn varnish at the edges where Desmond's hands had been, decade after decade, taking it down and holding it and putting it back, because that was the only way he'd been permitted to keep her close. "He came to my shop," she said, and something enormous was opening in her chest. The awning still says Pye's in the old letters. He walked past and he saw it. He'd been unwell in the spring, his heart. When he came out the other side, he drove to Wynhaven. He said a woman who had Lottie's manor came out and took his coat and didn't make a performance of it. Eula's voice was steady and dry and coastal, the voice of someone who had kept a secret for 31 years and was finally setting it down. He said he thought for a moment he'd walked back into his own life, and then he thought, here is a Pye in Lottie's shop, doing Lottie's work, while a man like Halm is trying to take the corner from her. He said he couldn't watch it happen twice. Outside on the gravel drive, a car arrived, then another. Eula looked toward the north windows without alarm. "The grandson," she said. "There's a second car." Then not only the grandson. Regan looked at the wooden treble clef in her palm, smooth and small and certain, and understood what it was for. Along the far wall of the workshop, under the main bench and set back in shadow, was a flat cabinet, no bigger than a suitcase, fitted with a brass lock that was new. She set the treble clef in the lock. It turned. The cabinet held paper, documents blue-backed, bound with faded ribbon, and on top a handwritten sheet. "Regan, the cabinet is not a keepsake. It is a wall they cannot climb. Give it to Mirabelle Chow. She'll know what to do with it, because she's the one who told me to get rid of it 30 years ago, and I told her I was keeping it. She'll say she told me so. She'll be right. Dr." The workshop door opened. Corbin Rowe came in, and behind him, uninvited, Prescott Halm, with a man she didn't know, and a torch he hadn't switched on until he was inside, which was the most frightening thing she'd seen all week. Halm surveyed the room, with the satisfaction of a man who believes he has arrived at the right moment. His eyes moved to the cabinet, the open lock, the documents in Regan's hands. "Miss Pye," he said pleasantly, "you've saved us some time." "You're on private property," Corbin said behind him. Something had gone flat and cold in his voice. Property under dispute. A transfer made by an elderly man of questionable judgment to a woman who'd known him 3 weeks. He held out a hand for the documents. "Whatever's in that cabinet is subject to the estate claim which makes it." "Bank records," Regan said. He stopped. "Rowe family bank records, from 1971, Wynhaven Commerce and Trust, the Pye account." She lifted the top sheaf, and a memo. A handwritten memo from a member of the Rowe family instructing the bank manager to call in the Pye business loan and to accept no payment arrangement. She held it into the lamplight, so the ink showed clear and old. That's documented financial fraud that destroyed a woman's family, kept in this cabinet by the man who knew about it, who was never allowed to apologize for it, and who apparently spent 50 years making sure that when he died, there would be a record in someone else's hands. The room had gone very quiet. Corbin had not moved from the door. When Regan looked at him, his face had the expression of a man who has just been told a story he thought he already knew and found the ending entirely different. "My family did that," he said, "not a question. Your great-grandmother, in writing, signed." He crossed the room without looking at Holm. He came and stood at the cabinet and looked at the documents, and his jaw worked and he did not say anything for a while. Then he looked at the wall. At all the names, at Lottie at the center, at the worn little violin in its slot. "He told me this was where he kept his failures," Corbin said. "I know," Eula said. "He told everyone that." "Is that what she was to him?" The question came out cracked. "Is that what she was?" "She was the one thing," Eula said quietly, "that your family decided he wasn't allowed to have." Holm had been very still during this. Now he spoke, and the pleasantness was entirely gone. "Whatever sentimental." "There's a conservation easement," Regan said. "Miss Chow mentioned it. The lakefront is protected in perpetuity. You can't build on it. You couldn't build on it the day you began making offers on the adjacent lots." She set the documents on the workbench carefully. "You've been threatening a woman over a property you couldn't legally develop either way. You wanted the corner lot and you needed this estate to seem valuable enough to apply pressure." She held his gaze. "You've been chasing a parcel that stopped being developable before you started." The arithmetic of exposure ran behind Holm's eyes. 3 years of patient accumulation, finding a total of 0. Corbin turned from the wall. In the lamplight, he looked nothing like the man who had walked into the pressing shop that afternoon with a folder and a list of legal consequences. He looked like someone who had just found a room in a house he'd lived in his whole life and hadn't known existed. "Get off this property," he said to Holm. His voice was quiet in the way that was worse than shouting. "Don't send a lawyer in the morning. Send a letter of apology." He held Holm's gaze. "I have 8 months of your firm's communications detailing exactly how you apply financial pressure to heritage property owners. My family has used solicitors in this town for 60 years. Consider that before you file anything." Holm looked once at Regan, a look that tried to find something to use and found nothing, and he left. The man with the torch went with him. 2 sets of headlights swept across the north windows and thinned down the drive. The workshop went still. Eula Whitby sat down in the chair by the pressing bench and let out a long breath. The lamp swung slowly to a stop. Corbin was still looking at the wall. "The music school," he said, "in Toronto. He founded it 20 years ago. He won't close it even though it costs." He paused. "A significant amount. He told me it was his responsibility. He said music had to be taught to people who couldn't afford to learn it." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought he was being principled. I thought it was about music." "Wasn't it?" Regan said. "It was about her." He almost laughed. The sound didn't quite make it. "She couldn't afford lessons. He told me once, I was 15 maybe, that the woman he'd loved most was someone who could hear a piece of music and understand it without being taught. I thought he was talking about my grandmother." He looked at the violin on the wall. "My grandmother left every room the moment he started playing. I thought that was just who they were." He turned around. His face was wet, and he didn't attempt to conceal it, which told her something important about him. "I came here to offer you money," he said. "I came here to make this go away." "I know." "The school needs. The estate was the only asset left with enough value to." He stopped. He knew that. He knew what he was doing to me when he signed the deed. Something between grief and admiration crossed his face. He did it anyway. "He left you something too," Eula said. She reached into the pocket of her green cardigan and held out an envelope. Corbin looked at it for a moment, then took it in both hands the way a person holds something they're not sure they deserve to open. Regan looked at the violin, at Lottie, at the worn edges where Desmond's hands had been, decade after decade, taking it down and holding it and putting it back because that was the only way he'd been allowed to keep her near. "The instruments," she said. "Not the land, the instruments." Corbin looked up. "He spent 50 years making them," Regan said, "each one with someone's name on it. A body of work no one outside this room has ever seen, by a man whose name means something in his field." She moved to the center of the workshop, among the hanging forms and the curved ribs and the waiting wood. That's not a failed room. That's an exhibition. That's the story told the way it should have been told. The maker and the woman, the family that tore them apart, the wall he kept for 50 years. That's the show that funds the school. That's what keeps the lights on for everyone who depends on it. She looked at Lottie. And it doesn't cost me a door. He was very still. Outside, the lake lay absolutely quiet under the first snow. You run a mending shop, he said. I do. You don't know how to hang an exhibition. No, she agreed. But I know how to read a room full of strangers and tell you which one of them is lying, about whether they can afford something. I know you've been running the school alone for years and you're running out of things to sell. I know you didn't send a lawyer today. You came yourself. She held his gaze. I know that means something. He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp gave his grandfather's eyes a color she hadn't expected, warmer than she'd thought, when they weren't being held at a distance. That's a very large thing to offer someone who came here to take your property, he said. You came here because you didn't know the story, she said. Now you do. The letter from Desmond, when Corbin finally opened it, was short. It ended. You have been holding the roof up alone over everyone's heads for 20 years, and you never once complained to me, not once, which means you are either very good at suffering or very good at love, and I think you know which one I believe. Find someone worth building something with. Stop being so careful about everything. Your grandmother was careful every day of her life, and it didn't save any of us. Grandad. Corbin folded it. He held it in his lap a while. The exhibition opened in February in the school's main hall in Toronto, and it was called simply Lottie. One word set in plain letters above a door, opening onto a room that held 50 years of Desmond Rowe's finest work, and the true account of who he had made it for, and what it had cost them both. It ran 6 weeks. It was extended twice. By the time it closed, the school's deficit had been reversed, and the waiting list for autumn enrollment was 3 years long. Regan kept the lake property. She opened the workshop to young instrument makers from across the country, a residency Corbin administered, and she kept stocked with coffee and a directness about when someone's work wasn't ready yet that turned out to be exactly what the residents needed. She kept Pye's pressing, had the awning repainted, PYEs, in the same blocked style as the old letters. She kept the treble clef on the windowsill above the register. She kept Lottie. The violin, in the end, came to Windhaven, hanging on the workshop wall in the place Desmond had kept it, because it had hung there 50 years and the wall had learned the shape of it. Corbin came to Windhaven on working weekends, and then on weekends that were not exactly about work, and then on weekends that were not about work at all, and he was not a man who did things quickly or carelessly, which turned out to suit her. The first time he kissed her was on the workshop step in March, while the ice was going out on the lake, and she had flour on her hands from the biscuits she'd been making for the residents' Saturday lunch, and he said very seriously, "I'd like to do that again, if you'll let me." She said, "Thursday afternoons are usually quiet," and he laughed. A real laugh, startled out of him, and the sound of it went out over the water, and the water held it. Desmond Rowe came back to Windhaven the following May for the opening of the residency. He was thinner than he'd been in October, and he moved with a careful economy that told the truth about what the winter had cost him. But when he walked into the workshop, his workshop, unlocked and lit and full of people, and the smell of new wood for the first time in his living memory, he stopped in the doorway the way Regan had stopped in November, and he was very still. He found her at the workbench, showing a resident how to plane a piece of spruce without coming against the grain. "You pressed the lining," he said. She looked up. "The whole place," he said. It was wrinkled. His mouth moved into the smile she'd first seen 3/4 formed on a Thursday afternoon, and this time it finished crossing his face completely, and it took 10 years off him, exactly as she imagined it once had. Overdue. A letter came from him that autumn from Halifax, long and dry, and full of complaint about the humidity, and a small disagreement he was conducting with a frame-maker he refused to stop using because the man's daughter played violin and had come to the school on a full bursary. Under his usual observations, he wrote a single line. "A coat, Regan. I came in with a coat and $12, and hands that couldn't hold a needle. Look at the whole of it now. It was always going to be the coat. It was always only ever the mending." She cut the line out and put it in the wooden treble clef, which had become the place she kept the things that mattered. Then she went to open the shop, because Thursday mornings were never as quiet as she hoped, and there was always someone at the door who needed something stitched back together, and she had long since stopped being surprised by where that could lead.